Welcome to another episode of The Cynical Writer. Before we get started, I would just like to remind you that if you would like to support this channel, the best way to do that is to purchase my books. My latest being the book The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, which is essentially an historical epic of sorts. But now that we've gotten that out of the way, I will say, why aren't more men writing books? Certainly, I'm writing books, and why aren't they reading books? This video, though, is going to be focused more on writing than reading, even though those things are intertwined, because it does seem like nowadays that most writers, especially online, are female, which I don't think that obviously females writing or women writing that is inherently a problem. I actually think it is incredibly attractive when a woman writes, and and some of the best writers in history have been women, including Jane Austen, including the Bronte sisters, including Mary Shelley. Some of the most talented writers have been women, and female writers, especially in the classic era, often had a graceful sensibility that made their poetry um, quite beautiful. And so I actually think that women are fully capable of being very talented writers, and in some cases more talented than men. So I don't think it's not a problem that women write, but I do think that when the majority of people in an industry, if you only have one kind of person in an industry, whether it's an industry that's mostly men or mostly this or mostly that, um, it can create a bubble, so to speak, where people are only writing a certain way or thinking with one voice, and that can leave the industry creatively stagnant. Of course, at one time, this happened with men, where men controlled most of the publishing industry. Now, some people will say, "Well, men just deserve to be um, to be second class citizens now when it comes to the publishing industry. They had their turn. Well, now it's women's turn." But to me, if you have that attitude, then you're not really for equality. You're for revenge. Um, you're seeking vengeance, not equality. And I actually think that, and someone made this observation, I think, in a very astute way, that I read in a comment, that there's actually an underlying patriarchal attitude to that, where you're essentially saying that, okay, men are pathetic because they need help, but that's a patriarchal attitude. Actually, that's not a and I know that word is overused and often isn't used appropriately, but that's not a feminist attitude. That's a patriarchal attitude, that you're essentially saying, well, men are pathetic, they don't need help. So in many regards, people who have such attitudes have become the very thing that they hate. And because I've often think, when it comes to politics, especially, or any kind of belief system, that people don't actually believe what they say in their heart. To me, people believe how they behave, how they treat other people, their actions. Our actions are what define us. And so, to me, if you want to look at what someone truly believes, don't listen to what they say. Listen to how they act and how they treat other people. Um, in that regard, I think, and I actually think we would probably live in a better world if more people would would call people out on that and treat others according to their actions, not what they say. So, so I think it would be perfectly appropriate to, for example, to say, especially, and it can especially irk people when you do this, when you say, well, you're just upholding the patriarchy. You are what you hate. You're a misogynist, and of course the woman would go, of course I'm not a misogynist. I'm this or that. Well, yes, you are, in terms of how you behave. I don't care what you say on the matter. Um, it's kind of like how people who have, cognitive dissonance around, let's say, wanting to help poor people, but at the same time, or believing that poor people should be taken care of, but at the same time, they will say things like, oh, well, if you're really poor, then you're better off dead, which would actually go against the idea that you actually care about the poor. So such people can in many cases be classified as bigoted or classist, even though they would claim otherwise. Or people, for example, who say that we should protect human life, but they won't do anything to actually make that a reality in terms of the government helping people. That they all they also don't really care about human life. It's simply a talking point for them, and so people have in many cases cognitive beliefs that create a cognitive dissonance, where what they actually believe deep down can be quite different. Um, but anyway, I got a little sidetracked there. But so why aren't men writing? Well, it's difficult actually for me personally to give an opinion on that because I've always been into writing and reading. Well, I wasn't when I was really little, but by the time I was in middle school and high school, I got into writing and reading, and I was never really into sports or anything like that. And it's just so I have trouble relating to that because yes, I faced the same societal pressures that men typically do, but it wasn't something that I gave into. I grew up in a family that was very artistic, especially my father, who was an artist. Yes, he did pressure me to hunt and fish a little, um, which he being a big hunter, and I was interested in hunting and fishing when I was little, and I still am interested casually in fishing to this day. Although I'm not so interested that I want to do it all the time, but and I still will occasionally go hunting with my father, even though I do it more for him than out of my personal enjoyment. I did inherit other interests of his, for example, his interest in the Universal Classic Monsters from his childhood and all of that, and we can bond over that quite a lot. But I didn't really inherit his interest in hunting, even though I understand it, and I do have a passing interest in archery, but just hunting is not. At most, it's a passing interest. It's not something I would consider to be a great passionate interest, and but anyway, so I was I but I grew up in a family that was very creative. My sister is also very creative and is a writer herself. And although my mother and my eldest sister are, I wouldn't put into the creative category, especially my eldest sister. Um, they're still, good people, and my mother has been very kind and very supportive. But I wouldn't really classify them as being creative. So, the interesting about creative genes is that they can. Some people can be born creative in families, and then other times they're not creative. Um, but anyway, and so I can't really relate to that. But I think that one reason why men aren't writing is because they have essentially been shut out somewhat of the publishing industry, which is focused so much on female readership that men simply can't get a foot in the door, and so many men have been forced to self-publish, and I think that's where a lot of men are going. They're going to self-publishing. I know for example, didn't pursue traditional publishing because I couldn't get an agent. And I think one of the reasons why I couldn't get an agent is because so many of the agents were like, "Well, I need in order for me to represent you, I need to personally relate or emotionally connect with the book." And I'm thinking, I understand that to a degree. I understand that agents need passion projects, but at the same time, I don't think that an agent can only do passion projects because they also have a responsibility um, to champion things that they think the public is going to like, not necessarily what they're going to like. And lawyers represent people that they also do not like. That's their job. Um, but because um, we live in this age that is so, the publishing industry has become so female centric that often they don't want to represent authors who may go against that. And I do think this has created a perpetual bubble where I've actually seen some quite bigoted behavior um, in the um, in the publishing industry among especially some women who say things like, "Oh well, again, men just don't matter. They just don't matter, or who cares if they suffer," which can actually be quite hurtful when you have women who can be dismissal of the can be who can dismiss the problems that men have. Um, Certainly, I would never consider dating such a person. Like when it comes to women, I would consider dating like we can disagree on certain political opinions, but if you can't even show compassion towards men in any way, then that's not the kind of person that I would want to even befriend. I mean, I do have some casual acquaintances online with writers who held such attitudes, but I don't think I could ever be close friends with them. But anyway, I also think though that I especially don't see a lot of younger male writers. The few male writers that I do see are older men. Um, I'm actually probably one of the youngest male writers that I know, and I'm not that young. I'm 30. I don't see a lot of younger men, and the fact that younger men aren't writing perplexes me because I understand why they aren't going traditional, but I don't understand why they can't self-publish at the very least for their own satisfaction, because that's what I do because I care about art that much. But I suppose it's because if you're not actually receiving positive feedback from your writing, if you live in a world that doesn't really seem to care about it, then why would you write? I can understand why a lot of young men would be put off by that. And on one hand, men are stuck in two different worlds right now. They're stuck in a world that tells them that they shouldn't write because only sissies write, and this is what I would call the patriarchal attitude, I suppose, even though I don't like that word, where men are saying, "Well, you should play sports, you should do this, you shouldn't write, you need to work hard and make a living, you shouldn't be writing," and that can discourage a lot of men. But at the same time, they also live in a world where publishing has become so female centric that they're also shut out there and feel like they don't belong there either. And so there aren't really a lot of options for them because they live in a world that is essentially schizophrenic, with people telling them contradictory things, telling them that they need to show their emotions, but at the same time they need to keep their emotions inward because showing emotions would mean that you're vulnerable. And so we live in a world where there's a plethora of contradictions, where there isn't one central message to anything. And because we live in a world where progress has been made, but at the same time, um, we still have these old attitudes and platitudes that are lingering. So we live in a world that's quite schizophrenic, and and so I think for that reason, just men just aren't writing as much because they live in a world that doesn't encourage it. And again, I write because I get such a personal sense of satisfaction out of it that I couldn't I couldn't not write. I'm compelled to do it that much. But I think especially because of the algorithms online, and because that those tend to cater to female readership and to romance, I can understand why male writers would be put off by that. And yes, again, I will say that many of the most successful writers in the publishing industry still are men, but they're men who typically have been in the publishing industry a long time. They're not that they're and therefore they're very powerful. I don't really see a lot of young and upcoming men who have that kind of power. When it comes to younger people who wield such power, it's mostly female authors. And we also just live in a world, I think, this anti-intellectual culture that prioritizes cheap tastes and catering to the lowest common denominator, that favors simple language and simplistic narratives, and doesn't actually favor the big epic books that men used to write. And I think that can also play a role, is that if you live in a world where that kind of literature is not being valued, then I can understand why a man would ultimately not be interested in writing. I'm interested in writing because I'm compelled in that direction, because it gives me a sense of artistic fulfillment, and it draws me closer to God, so to speak. So for me, I couldn't not write, but I can understand why some men it might be difficult to write for those reasons. Again, I don't really have any hard statistics to back any of these things up. It's simply my own opinion, and so I hope you will take my opinion into consideration. So I guess that's all for today. Again, if you would like to support this channel, you can support me by buying my books, which are linked in the description section. And until next time, goodbye.